really short. So I want to build interactive stories about characters who struggle to solve their problems, characters who have to reevaluate their priorities and evolve as people, characters with motives and desires that go beyond simple power, altruism, or survival. And I want to torture those characters with agonizing choices. Video games often shy off from trying to tell that kind of story, perhaps because it's hard to square player agency with excruciating repeated failure. So instead, we have lots of games about finding out someone else's history or reacting to a more nuanced villain. GLaDOS is way more memorable than Shell. Those are fine, enjoyable stories, but we're not really making the player the protagonist in the full sense. They just get to be an onlooker. So seeking examples of significant player agency and evolving protagonists, I found a lot of value in tabletop story games. A story game is a term of art here. I'm talking about RPGs that are light on die rolling and result tables and often don't use a game master at all. Instead, they provide rules that help all the players tell interesting stories about their characters. Achieving a good narrative is the win condition. Polaris is a game explicitly about tragedy. Characters have weariness counters that increase whenever those characters have to do something cynical or violate their own ideals. And the thing is, there's no way to make your weariness counter go down again. You're always moving towards a despairing breakdown, and everybody knows this. So when you play Polaris, focus shifts on to questions other than what is going to happen. We all know in general terms what's going to happen. The question is, what are the precipitating incidents, and is there anything that the protagonists are going to be able to salvage from the situation? I often have the instinct, and I think I'm not alone here, that narrative elements need to hide the cogs and feel as naturalistic as possible, but Polaris and many other story games demonstrate that we can get very interesting results by having narrative mechanics that we expose to view. Here's a feature from Monster Hearts. Events give you tokens that you can spend to influence what other characters do later on. If you seduce someone or find out their secrets, you can earn a token you can later spend to improve a die roll where you're in conflict with another character, and a couple of interesting things come of that. If the reason that you can get your friend to help you is because you're able to blackmail them, that scene is going to have a very different resonance than if it's because they're in love with you. And this mechanic also motivates players to set up situations where they'll gain those tokens in the first place, an incentive to think manipulatively. Besides, the player has to decide when to use up these resources, which forces them to think about which conflicts they care about the most. So the key here is the level of abstraction. One outcome in the story can be crystallized into an object and used later as a kind of narrative currency, but it retains more meaning than in numerical experience points. Another common feature of several story games is that players have to declare not just what they're doing, but what outcome they're hoping for. So not I lean in to kiss Leia, but I kiss Leia and we become lovers. Even if the protagonist doesn't get what they want, this focuses everyone on character motives. And in fact, it's common to declare several layers of motive. Maybe the short-term goal is to get a girlfriend, but the long-term goal is to become less isolated. Having to declare those motives and think about them and change them keeps the story focus on the internal richness of the character. Some modern interactive fiction does ask for player motive, from Sunless Sea to Pieces in the Choice of Games series, but tabletop story games often go much further with that information, establishing conflict between goals chosen by the player. If you know what a character wants the most, you can hit them the hardest. Speaking of making life hard for players, several story games assign every protagonist an antagonist who's also played by a human. The antagonist's job isn't simply to get in the way, it's to find ways to raise the stakes or provide consequences that put the protagonist under stress. A skilled antagonist learns to offer choices that are fundamentally non-parallel and incommensurable, choices weighted by risk versus safety, empathy versus idealism, self-expression versus conformity, loyalty to one character or another, all at the same time. And game designers aren't new to the idea of avoiding simple decisions and obvious dominant strategies, but the same rule applies to narrative choices. We want choices that have pros and cons along multiple axes of the story, just like you'd expect a given unit in an RTS to have multiple advantages and disadvantages. So tabletop story games are a master class in narrative mechanics. I recommend Fiasco. It's a game that recreates the mad energy of a Coen Brothers film. It's a pretty accessible one-session system, and it's a great place to start if you haven't played story games before. You will probably wind up setting something on fire. Monster Hearts is about teenage monsters trying to figure out love and sex and eventually growing up. Microscope zooms in and out of action and allows the players to decide which parts of a developing story they want to explore next. And sort of delve into those bits. My Daughter, the Queen of France lets players replay the same scene over and over as they change what they think really happened. Polaris is the game about tragedy at the end of the world. Your characters will suffer and die. Their civilization will be ruined by demons and by their own personal flaws. I found this enormously enjoyable. So for theoretical discussion about these games, there's a forum at storygames.com, but there's no substitute for playing some of them yourself, both to borrow mechanics and because the process teaches interactive story skills like nothing else. Learn to play a good live antagonist, and you will be well equipped to torture your players.